What was it like growing up in London?
I mean, I didn't know anything different, to be honest. I've lived in London for 30 years now, 29 years, coming up to 30 years. So I don't really know much, or I didn't know any other way to live, to be honest. As I got older, you kind of learn to appreciate what you have a lot more. The more you travel, the more you go out to other parts of England. But I mean, I've lived in Ladbroke Grove there my whole life, so West London. And literally, I wouldn't change it for the world, to be honest.
Yeah.
For me, it'll always be home.
Yeah.
I always feel I've moved out before for work, but I always find myself coming back home.
Okay. So, what were the people like growing up? School?
Look, my area in London's because it's so vast. There's so many different parts of London. So, parts of West London could be completely different to parts of South London or North London, for example. We were lucky. My part of London was very multicultural. There's literally all walks of life, and all different classes of people. You know, from the working class, from the really poor to the very fortunate in like, or financially fortunate anyway, in life. So it caused confusion growing up as well. You know, especially if you come from a poorer neighbourhood and you live so close to these multi-million-pound homes and that, it's a bit of confusion. But again, what I found for a lot of people as well, it creates a goal. A forward thinking to where they want to reach in life, where they want to go. But no, the vibe in London's good. You have your rough times, your dangerous times, as anywhere in the UK, I suppose. But the community spirit and the vibe of the people and the neighbours in the area, like I said, I wouldn't change it for the world.
Uh-huh. And it's the same now? That community vibe, community spirit, is it the same as when you were growing up, or has that changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, for me, it seems very similar. I think it's, if anything, depending on what happens in the area, it gets stronger, and then sometimes you don't notice it, and then events happen which makes you really notice how close-knit the community is. I mean, for me, like I said, because I've grown up and I've lived my life through, I've kind of developed with the times, and I mean, I've always felt at home there. I've always trusted my neighbours, trusted the people around me, the community centres. So I don't think I've ever had a stage where I thought, oh, it's different, or we're losing the community vibe. Sometimes it just goes into the shadows. But in a time of need, the instant reaction when you see everyone come together makes you realise that it is there. And it is always there. We just need to communicate more and kind of keep it in the limelight rather than staying united in the shadows.
And that brings us quite nicely on to my next question, which is about 6 weeks ago, the Grenfell Tower burnt. And can you just describe what you were doing immediately afterwards, the next morning, the next few days?
Yeah, I mean, so my house in West London, Ladbroke Grove, is about a 90-second walk from Grenfell Tower, so very, very, very close. I was woken up at about 2:30 in the morning by my dad saying that there was a fire. Now, the instant panic there and confusion was I thought there's a fire in my house. So you wake up quite startled and quite panicked. To then woke up and he was saying, no, the block across the road's on fire. Now, I've seen high-rises on fire, or flats within high-rises on fire before. So you think, okay, cool, there's probably a fire in the flat and it'll be contained. Like there was one 6 months prior to that, just down the road in Trellick Tower. So you didn't think of how big it would be. And then when I stepped out of my door, so I thought, look, it was on the news, I could hear it on the news downstairs. So I thought, okay, if it's on the news, something must be happening. So I took a step out the door and you could just see smoke, literally thick clouds of smoke. If I'm honest, that first hour was it was confusion, because I was set to have work at 9 in the morning and it was about 3 a.m. now. And it was just a state of confusion, because at first, if I'm honest, I spent the first 15-20 minutes just looking at the blaze. It's more of a question, why is all that plastic looking stuff, looks like explosions coming off. It just didn't look normal. And then I thought, okay, let me go back home, I've got work in the morning. So I went back into my room, but I was awake, so I put the TV on, and then I flicked through all the news channels. I could see it was breaking news everywhere, and that's when I realized, look, something massive is happening right on my doorstep. And then I got a text from one of my closest friends he started talking about it and mentioned that the St Clement James Centre, which is a local-based charity around the corner, was open. They've opened their doors to people from Grenfell and the residents. So I thought, look, I'm too awake to not do anything. let me go put in a few hours helping some people there, and then I'll take myself to work. And I think it was from that moment, I mean, everything just felt like a bit of a movie. Nothing seemed real from that minute on. About 9 a.m. we had the first firefighters come into the centre, and the smell that you could smell from them, it's hard to explain, do you know what I mean? It's like literally it smelled of death, they smelled of burnt, the look in their faces, you know, sometimes you can look at someone's face and, you know, their face will tell 1,000 words. It was exactly that. You could see that they've just gone through something that they would never expected they would have had to. And then the initial aid started happening. So people, I mean, the first group of people I'd seen at the time, we're in West London, and was East London Mosque turned up at about 7 a.m. with like 3-4 lorries full of clothes, food, water. And that's when things started feeling even more surreal, because it didn't feel like home anymore, do you know what I mean? The amount of panic and people crying and families looking for families, and, you know, emergency services taking a breather, looking like hell. It just didn't feel like we were at home, do you know what I mean? And the next few days, I think that whole first day was about 21 hours we spent in the centre. I couldn't go to work at that time.
Okay.
Like, the screaming of families, the mums looking for children, you know, younger teenagers looking for parents and uncles and cousins, and there's so much confusion and so much help needed that, I mean, it wasn't just me, there's hundreds of us that you couldn't walk away. I mean, if someone was able to walk away at that point, then it says a lot about that person as a human being, do you know what I mean? Because it was literally a state of emergency.
Yeah.
So we spent about 21 hours on the first day. The main concern, I think, was just sorting and separating clothes, food. So we put a little structure into place where we were separating women's clothes, adults' clothes, kids' clothes, food, and so on. As you would do in a time like that, when a lot of donations coming, that was kind of what all of the youth centres in the area and the religious buildings in the area, the church, the mosque, that's what everyone was doing. It was not until the next day when I realised it got to about 1 p.m. the next day, so we were out again from about 6 in the morning that day. And by 1 p.m. there was still no official help at all. And you know, by that point, you've gone 24 hours in, that's when the panic comes, because, I mean, I wasn't employed by the charity. I formed a team and a group with the guys who worked there. Naturally, it happened. It was like the stars of the line for that to happen, for us to link up as an organisation and help each other out. But at 1 p.m, no official help, no call from the council, no call from government, no call from any of the leading charity organisations in the country. There was no structure, no help, there was no guidance into where all of these donations are going. And we're in hundreds of thousands of boxes at the moment.
Yeah.
Like, it got to the point where the aid was so much that it was becoming harder work for us to deal with, because it was too much coming in. But again, there was no communication, there was no press release to let people know official places in where they can send their aid, which obviously didn't help with the organisation of getting survivors and those victims from the tower and the people who have been evacuated from the surrounding blocks together, because the first 2 days were completely wasted on just trying to sort out the mass amounts of aid coming through. But then light to that situation was seeing the people come together, and not just people from the area, East London, North London, South London, Bristol, Manchester, Birmingham, Brighton. There were people from everywhere in the country, and it just made me realise they'd obviously woken up and seen it on the news the way I had. I just thought, look, that could have been us, do you know what I mean? That could have been my friends, my family, that could have been my home. We've got about 4,000 tower blocks in the country, so that must have touched a lot of people's hearts. And then we started feeling that in the area. You started feeling that warmth. There was still panic, there was no anger at this stage, though. I think it was more people were confused. It was a more state of confusion. The first 2 days at Clement James, we had things not under wrap, but we were starting to manage the aid coming in. And then I was phoned in the morning by the person who manages the centre, who said that the Queen and Prince William are coming to Westway, and they wanted to meet people from the separate organisations that have been helping on the ground. I think because I'd helped so much and we'd formed such a good working partnership in those initial 48 hours, that they wanted me to join them. So we went to meet the Queen, and this is before any government, still no council correspondence, still no government correspondence. So the first part of major authority that we had seen was from the royal family, and you know, it was nice of them to come and see the people. But at that stage, for me personally, I can't speak on behalf of anyone else that was there, but for me personally, we're coming to, you know, thank these organisations for helping, but there was so much work still left to do in the streets, in the youth clubs, in the church, in the mosque, that, you know, it needed to be more productive, I'd say. We made it clear that the lack of help is becoming a major concern and a major problem, not just for the centre we were working in, but for the entire community. And then a couple of later, the Prime Minister came to the organisation that I was working with, and that's when the first meeting had taken place with the Prime Minister. Now, at that stage, my attention, we had the aid operation going, and it kind of shifted. Now we need to try and start pushing for answers and organisation, rather than initially just focusing on all the aid efforts that are coming in. If I do just track back quickly, though, on the first day, we did actually have Kensington and Chelsea Council in the church with us, but they were in absolute shambles. Genuinely, you would never think, look, forget whether you work for the council or not, we're all human beings. In a state of emergency, you know, they say fight or flight, you act in a certain way. You either run or you, I'm not saying bend the rules, but your survival instincts kick in. And when I say survival instincts, people might listen to this and think, oh, survival, it sounds like they're in the jungle or something, or it was that. Do you know what I mean? It was a war zone. It felt like a war zone. The panic was a war zone. Everything that was going on was that. And Kensington and Chelsea sat in the room, in a small desk at the back of the room, telling people that you just need to phone a telephone number, and we'll be able to help you, but you just need to call the number. Now, common sense in saying that is, you've just evacuated people at 1:30 to between 1:30 and 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. Who's got phones with them? Some people's houses are burnt to smithereens. There's no phones, no ID, no money. It's not, I mean, and I made it clear to them at that point that it's not hard for you guys to pull out your phones, get an orderly queue going on, and phone on behalf of these victims, the people that have just been, you know, just escaped the whole block on fire. But yeah, it was nothing. They mentioned that at one point that they were going to close the church doors at 7:30, so people needed to make their way to friends or family. Now the priest in the church and the bishop had made it clear to all of the team that were working in there that they were not prepared to close any doors. People needed help, their community needed help, and they wouldn't, you know, no doors were going to be closed. So it got to the point where we had to tell Kensington and Chelsea at that point, look, well, just to the manager herself, that look, there's no point in you guys being here. It felt very much so that they were on a rota. 7 o'clock was fast approaching, and it was, we've got to go home, rather than acting in a state of emergency. You know, we've all been there where we've done an extra 4, 5, 6 hours at work, and you don't get paid for it. But you know, certain times you need to do what you need to do, and there was no ownership from Kensington and Chelsea at all, which let me down, more so because of the way Kensington and Chelsea as a borough and a council are looked at from the outside. Oh, it's the richest borough in the country. You know, they've got the biggest reserve in the country and the longest waiting list for people to live there. But if you're not deemed financially stable, or you're not deemed to contribute to society enough financially, you're ignored in the area. Do you know what I mean? The residents of Grenfell have been ignored for years and years. They've expressed safety concerns. They've expressed, you know, fire concerns within the building. Ignored. Even to the point where there was a quote mentioning, "We fear that there will be a tragedy before our concerns are listened to." And you know, for a council to be taking complaints and letters like that and then not act anything, and then when the tragedy does arrive, to go into hiding, it's just complete shambles.
So it felt as if they were just not only non-existent but inactive.
They were in hiding. It felt like they were running away, not just inactive. It felt like, you know, some people say, oh, they felt like they're in too deep, so, you know, some people end up carrying, they dig further and dig further, and that's what it felt. It felt like they were literally digging a tunnel and running away from everyone. There was no official structure, no help.
What would you have liked them to do?
I'd honestly, at the time, just a bit of empathy, a bit of people skills. You're dealing with people who have just probably suffered the most traumatic event. Well, to us, it's the most traumatic event in British history since the war. You know, so a massive loss of life, and just a bit of compassion, a bit more structure, a bit more organisation. Bend a few rules. Don't worry about people's tenancy agreements and, you know, compensation that's going to people. That can all come. We've got time for that. Do you know what I mean? Act in a time of need. It shouldn't be members of the public and then members of the public who are forcing government to act to get onto Kensington and Chelsea and the TMO. You know, it's like they were left to do what they needed to do, but they didn't do anything. Have a bit more structure. Start putting people in housing, or release an official list of who was officially meant to be in the tower. Don't leave it to us on the ground to try and find out who lived where and how many families have survived. And there's about 100 independent lists that were happening in the first 3 days. I mean, if someone didn't pay their rent, I'm sure the council will be alerted straight away, and, you know, that person will be sent some sort of correspondence. So there has to be an official list of who was actually registered to live there. And then, I mean, even to that day now, we still haven't got an official list out. So when you ask what could they have done, it's things like that. Provide a list, provide a centre point, provide a calling point. Get some people out in high-vis jackets. Start organising people in the streets. Guide people to the right places. If you need clothes, if you're an evacuee from a tower, from the surrounding blocks and not Grenfell, you can go to X. If you're a survivor from Grenfell and you need support and advice and money and clothes and whatever, go to this location. But it wasn't. It was so scattered. And it doesn't feel... It shouldn't have been that difficult to put a process in together. No one's thinking that it should have been easy. Like I said, if this is the biggest disaster in British history, no one was ever going to be completely ready for that. But something that I said to the Prime Minister and something that I said to all of the officials that I've met is that you had a community at your disposal. You could have said jump and we would have said how high. If you needed this done, we would have done it. If that needed to be done, if it was helping the people of our area, we would have done it. Mm-hmm. But we didn't have that structure, so we had to do it ourselves. You know what I mean? And literally, when I say we did it ourselves, we actually did it alone without any formal structure or support. It was all self-managed and self-organised by everyone's neighbours.
And still doing it.
It's getting a little more now. 6 weeks in, it's getting a little more. So, I mean, we've got groups like Grenfell United who have now formed, and now they're the survivors who've got a committee from the Grenfell Tower themselves, and they've formed a group now, and they have an office base and things. But that was all organised by ourselves and amongst themselves and via the community. So again, even now, yeah, there's a little more official help coming in, I believe, but the trust is broken in the area. So for some people are willing to take the help, and some people are willing, I just don't want to go anywhere near it, to be honest. And it's understandable. You see, you know, there's certain news reports and it comes out as if the people are crazy for, you know, demanding answers, and it's not. I mean, when you've been left alone in a time of tragedy and you're at your lowest point and there is no one, the authorities that are meant to be here to help you are nowhere to be seen, it's a very, very, very long process to then build that trust again. Mm-hmm. And the problem is now is new members of the council who have come in, they seem to be also very defensive at the moment, which is the biggest frustration, because maybe they weren't at fault, but you have to understand you're stepping into a job where you've got a whole community who your establishment has let down. Now, it's nothing personal to you, and you have to approach that job and not take the concerns and the yells and the anger from residents. You shouldn't take that personally because it's your job. You should understand that the people before you, when you stepped into this job, have failed and let down. Stop acting defensive and start working with the people, because that's the only way you're actually going to build, you know, a bit of trust within the area again. So it's a bit...
Mm-hmm. There was something about Alec, the minister, the housing minister. He said something about within 6 weeks or so, or within a month, that people would be rehoused, they'd get financial aid, they'd get the support. Today marks 6 weeks on. Has that happened?
A load of rubbish. None of it has happened. They've made offers, but that's what tends to get put out in the press. They've made offers, but we don't look into the kind of offers that are being made. We don't look at you're trying to send someone from an 18th floor who survived the burning tower block into the 16th floor of another tower block out of the borough. You don't hear it. The Prime Minister had assured us that within 3 weeks, so this is after day 4 of the fire, within 3 weeks, all of those that need to be housed will be housed again. And that didn't happen at all. By 3 weeks, I think 2 or 3 people potentially, and you can't quote me on that because I'm not entirely sure, but 2 or 3 people from my understandings actually had taken on accommodation. It was promised that they would all be housed within the borough. It was promised that, unless, of course, that the families didn't want to be in the borough anymore and they wanted to move out. But again, yeah, it wasn't actioned. So it was also promised that, you know, the people's legal status within the country would not be looked at, because that was another concern within the area. There's potentially quite a few people who lived within the tower who weren't legally meant to be within the country, and at a time like this are probably in a very confusing state, because do you come forward for the help and support, or do you go in hiding because you're not meant to be? And we were told that it was, you know, that people's legal status would not be looked at. They can come forward for the help, they'll be treated like a victim. So that happened. A few of us got a message out in the area, and then a report a few days later came out to say that it would only be for 12 months. Which then again, those who didn't come forward again, what do you think? Do you think you come forward for 12 months, or depending on what country they've come from, it could be so war-torn back there that they just still go into hiding? But the emotional scar and the mental support that they're going to need, the mental health problems and risks after a tragedy like that, no one should have to go into hiding. Do you know what I mean? No one should have to hide themselves away. I was on the Victoria Derbyshire show live about a week or two after, and the housing minister was there, and we had to it took about 4 questions for him to confirm, are the people going to be housed in permanent accommodation, and he wouldn't answer. So it's these loopholes and the cuts, and some of the council representatives were asking people to declare themselves homeless, which all that does in essence is void their tenancy at Grenfell, and you can now be housed anywhere. You know, it's like little tactics, and this is where it goes back to my point when I said what could they have done in the first instance, is don't come in there protecting a profit or protecting a business. Come in there with the reserves that you have behind you and help the people that you've failed. And again, that hasn't happened. It still feels like they're very defensive, and it's very, oh my God. And they seem quite somewhat confused into the reaction from the community, which is even more confusing, because how can you not, as a human being, how can you not understand the disappointment and the frustration and the letdown from the residents you're meant to be looking after, you know?
In terms of post-traumatic stress, what is in place for survivors, for people like yourself that's actually working within the community? So what's in place?
Quite a few independent organisations have popped up within the areas into local community centres. The NHS have a take time to talk service, so after about a week and a half, people started receiving correspondence through their doors in the local area saying that there's a free phone number to call, and you can book in an appointment. So there are, I mean, that goes back to the beautiful side of things as well, is because we understand anyway the amount of stress that the NHS is under already with cuts and, you know, lack of staff. But the fact that in a time like this you see the true goodness in people, because independent organisations from across the country are coming in and offering services free of charge. So it's the major problem is for people in the area to know exactly who's offering what and where it's being offered is the problem. But if you dig deeper, especially for a lot of the more independent or in the grassroots organisations, there is a lot to offer there. But again, it feels more so from the independent organisations rather than anywhere else, to be honest.
And you are today 100 plus miles away from Grenfell, from Ladbroke Grove. What brings you to Bristol?
So I was invited out here to really take some time and relax, kind of get my head together. And, you know, a saying that I kept hearing throughout the time was, if you don't look after yourself, you'll never be able to look after anyone else. And that's what is happening in the community at the moment. We're all looking after each other. It's very very traumatic. There's a lot of stress. You know, you're taking in a lot of people's trauma as well in the different families you deal with. And I mean, coming out here was just a chance really to clear your head, take time. It's hard for anyone to actually understand that feeling of living within that. There's a graveyard towering over all of us, you know, and that creates a certain vibe, an eerie feeling. There's, you know, streets aren't quiet, but they feel quiet. You know, people seem to be getting on with normal life, but no one feels normal at the moment. Do you know what I mean? So I didn't realise how much I'd actually benefit from a breakaway and getting away from the area for a bit. But I mean, it's been amazing. Literally, just having a chance to focus and take time to relax and, you know, think about yourself a little bit. And it just allows me to, when I go home tonight, I know I'm going to be in a much clearer mindset and a much, you know, stronger mindset to carry on doing what we're doing and really push for justice and really make sure that the right people are getting the right help in the area.
What do you want to see, or what would you like to happen to the building?
Personally, it's very difficult because I just like that the end result of the building comes from the direct survivors from Grenfell. We've already expressed passion about a memorial there. Within the first 3 days, the truth is my attitude towards it was, oh no, they can't knock it down and build up new flats and turn that into private housing. I went straight onto the defensive. It must be social housing. These people must be able to live there again. But the truth of it is, that was before I realised the scale of the tragedy. Because now, no one in the area would want to live there. Do you know what I mean? It's, like I said, they say 80 lives lost. There's concern that there is quite a fair bit more. No one's going to want to live in that tower again. But I mean, it needs to be remembered. And I think it needs to be a token and a remembrance to the issues of social housing across the country, not just for where we're living, but across the country. No one should be living in death traps, and that's what that was. Grenfell Tower was a death trap. There's no denying that or beating around the bush with that one. It was a trap, and people weren't safe in their homes, and they paid the most expensive cost.